Hello, I'm Lisa Doolittle. I work with the Faculty of Fine Arts at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome to Ed Talks. It's my very great pleasure to be here today with Carla Carnaghan, who comes to us from the Faculty of Management. Dr. Carnaghan, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to interview you today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. We were just talking about a whole whack of awards that you have received for your teaching. But I'd like to start out with this question. How did you ever learn to teach?
It is not an easy thing. I think teaching is one of the lesser recognized performing arts.
Right.
I'm not going to say I have yet learned to teach because I think it's an ongoing process. But I think like many of us, we have had teachers that we liked aspects of, things they did that we thought were very effective or very interesting, or that left us with questions that we're still thinking about many years later. I think we're very lucky to live in an age where we have so many wonderful internet resources. We have so many wonderful books. There's one I know that's very well known, What the Best College Teachers Do, which I have looked at on a couple of occasions. Lots of good ideas. I certainly still regard myself as very much a work in progress, but I would say between the influence of good colleagues, teachers I've had, internet resources, these are all things that have been really helpful in thinking about how to go about teaching. Mm-hmm.
If we were to go back to your very, very first days of teaching, how did you start?
My very first days of teaching were doing tutorials. So that was an easy way to get started teaching because you're going in, you're covering some particular problems. The problems are pretty well chosen for you, and you're doing your best to explain them. I think then as you progress into teaching, most of us, because we're coming, or if we're coming from a PhD background, we're coming in with more of a subject matter expert orientation. Mm-hmm. But then I think we all start to appreciate there's far more to teaching than the information. It's how you convey it, it's trying to get students to think about it, it's trying to explain it effectively, it's trying to get students engaged with the material. And again, I think I started with the orientation of putting the subject matter out and then thinking more about how do we get it so the students internalize what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And what made you realize that it wasn't just content?
I think one of the things that I did early on was a research project on the use of student response systems or clickers in the classroom.
Oh, okay.
And there's one of the people who used a related pedagogy was Missouri in physics. And he's got interested in the issue of how you get students to internalize what you're doing when he discovered that although he was teaching physics and students were doing well on the exams, when he gave them a day-to-day world problem, you know, what would happen if you did X? They had not internalized what they'd learned in the class, so they still answered it more from the perspective of Aristotle than from Newton. In other words, what he had taught them they could answer on an exam, but it didn't affect their behavior or their thinking. And to me, that's probably the most important challenge of teaching, is getting them to internalize it enough that it affects how they do whatever it is they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Your field is?
Accounting.
Accounting.
Yes. Yes.
That's just numbers, Carla. You're fooling me. Accounting is just numbers. Come on. All we have to do is add and subtract, right?
It should be so easy. The assumption for those of us that are doing research in accounting is we must be doing triple entry accounting because that would be the next step beyond double entry accounting. Much of what we're doing in accounting is trying to provide professional judgment. How accountants apply accounting principles, because they are principles, not rules. How do you apply principles to develop a reasonable representation of an organization's performance, but also how users use that information? How do you effectively organize the information? What problems do people have using the information appropriately? And then in a more macro context, we get into issues of how information affects markets, right? When I put out an annual report, if I'm a company, what does the market do with that? How do they incorporate the information? Are there differences in how that information is used depending on where it is in the annual report or how it's presented? We also do work on aligning organizations' measurements with strategy and how they might measure their strategy and how you might get feedback going on whether your strategy is effective. So a lot of what's interesting about accounting is the judgment issues and the issues of improving organizational performance and improving people's ability to use the information as well as preparers' ability to provide that information.
That's a lot.
Yes, it's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yes.
So when you're teaching, what bits of that are you teaching these days?
I teach what's called intermediate accounting, financial accounting. So I'm starting with students, it's usually the first course in the major. They've taken their introductory accounting courses, which everybody in management takes. But the course I teach is often the first course they take if you're going to do your major in accounting. So what we're focusing on primarily is the preparation of financial statements, and again, how you start to apply those principles to provide information that's going to be helpful for decision making.
Okay. How do you teach that? Goes back to what you said earlier about internalizing. How do you teach it? What are some of the things that you do in the classroom that...
That's a really good question. And again, that's the one I spend most of my time thinking about. How do I get this internalized? And it is challenging in part because we have so much material to cover. And to be an accredited program by CPA Alberta, there's certain material we must cover in some way, shape, or form. I would say the main tools I'm currently using to help students engage better with the material, one is a simulation where the students are taking source documents and trying to understand how to apply accounting principles to create the accounting entries and then create the financial statements. And that's where you start to discover that many students know the concept, but not when and how to apply the concept.
Okay.
So you're giving them something closer to a real world situation and saying, how is this going to work?
Like you hand them a pile of receipts like I do to my tax accountant. Forgive me for being so simple-minded, but...
This is the electronic version. Here's a pile of receipts. Here's last year's trial balance. Give me a new set of financial statements.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, and this is the first time often they've done anything like that. And so they start to discover that, again, they know the general concept, but not how to apply it. And part of the reason I do that is from discussions with practitioners who said, well, they seem to know the theory, but they sometimes struggle in how to apply it. And I was thinking, what do you mean by theory? Well, they know how inventory flows, but not when you do that. When do you use those assumptions? So this is a chance to do that. Secondly, I do some case studies. So students, again, are put in a much less structured situation in the middle of an organization or some financial statement users facing a problem. You know, this is a written case, but that's the structure of it. What do you do to help them? What are the things they've done wrong? What are the things they've done right? What could they do differently? What should they be thinking about?
Before you get to the stage of reporting.
Often, or even as part of preparing a new set of reports.
Right.
You know, they've got these reports, what went wrong in preparing them, or what went right in preparing them. So that's another aspect. And then again, back to the response systems, I'm doing a little more in class where I'm putting out questions right in class and trying to get everybody to engage with the concept right then and there. Because I have found I can stand there and lecture and everybody will nod, yep, that's fine. And then you throw out the question and everybody's going, I don't know. So to give them a chance right then and there to engage with the material and then ask the question, okay, wait a minute, now I see where the problem is. How do we deal with, that's what I find that particular technology helpful for, is to get them at that point of covering the material of trying to apply it. Because I don't see a lot of value in them knowing the principle and being able to repeat it. They have to be able to use it.
Okay, so interrupting your lecture and... Yeah. And the results are encouraging, obviously.
They are in a number of respects. I think it's helpful. It gives me feedback. It gives them instant feedback. We also get that realization where we can say, okay, most people have this concept, or okay, only a handful of you have it. Let's spend another little bit of time on trying to sort this out. So I think they are helpful for the case studies. I think I sometimes get comments from the students. For them, that was the best part because they feel like they're an accountant. They're in a real world type situation. How do I deal with this? Yeah.
Okay. You've also told me that you work on 3 campuses. Now, you don't transpose yourself in the flesh.
Transporter technology, yes.
Yeah, to Edmonton and Calgary. So you're doing, how do you work on this, engagement, which to me, implies kind of being there. How
Right.
do you work on that when you're working across distance and online and...
And again, it's a good question, and it's not something I'm going to claim I've mastered, but I think what I'm doing right now is a good basis for building on. I have, for 2 terms, taught on all 3 campuses, Edmonton, Calgary, and Lethbridge, same class, and we've been doing blended learning, which the teaching center has been involved with.
Blended learning.
Blended learning. So partly we're up there in person. Because there's several of us doing this. I'm not the only one. So we're up there in person for 4 classes usually. And then the rest is being done using, again, technology, something like WebEx Training Center or WebEx Meeting Center, where we're doing it real time. Everybody's physically there at the same time. We're going through the problems the same way I would in class. We're discussing them. We're doing it, I'm doing it, and they're seeing it at exactly the time I'm doing it. So it's the same as a scheduled class. They can ask whatever questions. We can still do clicker type activities. I think it's gone reasonably well. I wouldn't say it works for everybody, but then I don't know of anything that works for everybody. Some of them really like it. I think my favorite comment to date has been one student who said it's the first time she's been able to attend class and do her laundry at the same time, because she's at home doing it, right? Because they're at home doing this. They are able to stay at home, and for many of them that was actually a very attractive part of it, because instead of going from work to school, because in Calgary and Edmonton we have often working adults who are taking classes in the evenings and weekends, they were able to go from work to home. They're still doing the class, but they don't have one more trip to make. And so they're able to go home during when we have our break. They can spend a little bit of time with their kids, or go down and get a snack from the kitchen or whatever it is, and then come back and continue. So that's how we've been doing it. And as I said, I and several colleagues have been doing this and trying out different approaches. It's a pilot project, because part of what we're doing is learning what seems to work better for particular situations and what might work better for other situations. So.
And are you finding some real challenges there? You've talked about how it is working, how you have these kind of more, I guess we can still call them non-traditional learners, but I think they're becoming more and more
Traditional.
This is what people are doing. What do you find for yourself, let's say, as a teacher? What have you found most challenging, or, with that kind of teaching and learning?
I'd say there's a couple of things. One is just the actual use of the technology.
Yeah.
And I spent a fair bit of time just playing with trying to get the audio quality good, because if somebody's going to be sitting there listening to you for 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 50 minutes, you want to make sure the audio quality is clear. Some of it was also video quality and determining better ways to project the screen so that it wasn't moving around too much on the student's screen. And there were some little details to sort out there. The one that I hadn't thought about sufficiently ahead of time, and it turned out the sort of polling technology was very helpful for this, is when we're in a classroom, you're looking a lot at the students and going with their facial expressions, and that provides you a form of feedback, whether they're saying anything or not. You can see if they're engaged, disengaged, interested. You need to switch to something else. They're sleeping all too often. You don't have that with this, because I deliberately did not have everybody's webcam turned on, because not everybody has an internet connection to their house that's going to support a whole bunch of different little video connections. And I wanted to ensure the best possible use for just conveying the audio and the screen. So that means, in some senses, you're in a room by yourself teaching, which is a very different experience. But the polling technology is very nice there, because you do get then somewhat regular feedback. And I still do throw out a lot of questions to get students. And I found participation was quite good online. So that the participation and the polling technology were both really important to get that interactivity back that you were no longer getting from just seeing them.
Right.
Yeah.
How many students are we talking about in this 2-hour and 50-minute class that are doing their laundry? How many washing machines are running across the province while you're teaching them?
Yes, excellent question. It depends. Edmonton is a little bit smaller. I think the first time I taught there was about 17 students.
17.
And Calgary is probably high 20s, low 30s students.
Okay, so we're not talking 100.
No, we're not talking 100. And the issues of scaling up would be a different set of challenges, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you like it? Do you like this teaching in a room? I mean, as a teacher, I would find it, as you say, a little startling.
There's
Such a human thing, sorry.
Yeah. Well, then that's, I guess, part of it. There's some things that aren't, that are different, let's put it that way. There's some things I really like about it. For example, for some international students, the ability to participate sometimes by text where you're not so comfortable about speaking, but you might be comfortable using text was nice for them. A couple of the lectures I recorded with their permission, just because I knew, for example, if it was right before Thanksgiving that a number of students weren't going to be able to be in class. And they really liked the ability to play it back later. Again, more time to let it soak in and understand what was going on. But it is different. And I know from talking to my colleagues, not all of my colleagues like it. As I said, I'm certainly not going to claim all the students like it. Some really like it. Some would rather have a very traditional class. They prefer the interaction. And one of the challenges for me that I need to continue to work on is creating that sense of community in the class.
Yeah. What do you imagine is a way to do that sense of community? That's exactly what is the issue, isn't it?
It is part of the issue, and I think I need to do more with, I would say, using other technologies, more like chat rooms and similar things, where it's not just class-related material. It can be in anything you want to talk about. If you're sitting in a class, often you're not talking to your classmate about the class, you're talking about last night's hockey game. And we know just from living in a world where there's all sorts of online gaming opportunities, there's lots of very viable, vibrant online communities. The challenge is providing the technology and the comfort level that people can create that same thing for a more of an online class.
Yeah, I mean, I was just noticing an article that the Teaching Centre posted about that word engagement, and they were talking about the different dimensions of engagement, and I think this is one of them, that social, that community level engagement is part of the teaching.
Right.
And you really don't want that to be missed. It seems perhaps a sideline, and then there's also the aspect of peer-to-peer teaching, because there's quite a bit of research on that. Do you ever approach that kind of thing where students are helping each other? Obviously, group work is one of the ways that happens.
I think with more of an online community, there'd be greater opportunities for that, because I would like to see more of that. I think there's lots of opportunity for somebody to throw out, I didn't quite get X. What are you guys taking on it? Somebody else's explanation may be way better than what I provided. Great, let's hear it, and let people then chime in and add their understanding, and then we can, if there's a general misunderstanding, then that's a chance for me to say something. If some people have a really great way of explaining it, I'd love to see that. That's a great way for me to learn. So
I've never done that kind of teaching, so that's actually very encouraging to hear about. And certainly there's a fair amount of push to do this kind of outreach, possibly because of a changing face of learners. Not everybody has every hour of every day to spend
right.
In the classroom.
Yeah, they're working, they have kids, and as I said, again, this is definitely a work in progress, but it's an interesting challenge, and it's something I think all of us that are working in it are learning quite a bit from.
Besides that, what other topics do you teach? But you talked only about one course that you're working on. Do you have a favorite topic?
The other course I am not currently teaching it, but I have taught for a number of years, is accounting theory, which I always refer to as accounting from the 30,000 foot view level, because we don't get into the details of how you record transactions. We're talking about some of what we talked about at the beginning of our discussion. What's the role of accounting in markets? What are the challenges in preparing useful information? What are preparers doing with it? What are managers' motivations to perhaps bias the numbers, engage in earnings management? So that's a much more macro view of accounting, and again, getting the students to think more critically about accounting as a social activity and about its role in society more generally. So I'm not currently teaching that, but that is another course I've taught.
And does that connect to your research more
It
directly?
does. Yeah, my research interests are related to financial disclosure, but I also have research interests related to technology and education and somewhat to earnings management. So yeah, but I would say the theory course, because it is focused on theory and research, is more related to my research interests.
And how do you see the two working together? Because that is so distinct about university teaching, I think, that we do research. We are so-called creating new knowledge, and ideally bringing that to our learners and bringing our learners
Right.
into that work.
Right.
How does that work in your case?
There's some elements of it. Certainly in accounting theory, there's lots and lots of opportunity to talk about research, my research, other people's research, and how it informs our understanding of the role of accounting in markets, in organizations. It also affects intermediate accounting, though we don't get as much time to talk about it as I might like, simply because we do have a lot of material to cover, but issues of measurement, if we're using measurements that are based on market values, what are the possible problems with doing that? Are the market values always going to be the right values? If there is no market value, where do you go and get a value from if you're trying to get something that's sort of what the market value would have been?
And you're talking about like an asset,
an asset,
an
yes.
object, a building, or
Right. As opposed to often in accounting we're using historical cost. What did you pay for it X years ago? And we get into discussions of things like the Hudson's Bay in Calgary, right? The Hudson's Bay in Calgary, if you looked at historical cost, I don't know how long that building has been there, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 100 years, I don't know.
the downtown building?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, 100.
100?
I don't know, maybe.
Could
I
well
wouldn't know,
be.
it's been there a very long time.
But if we're recording that at historical cost, what is that number versus its current market value? But the number likely reported on, to the extent Hudson's Bay still owns that building and hasn't sold it and leased it back, and I haven't checked on that, maybe the value when that building was built was $50,000. That's certainly not its value today. But then again, what information are you putting out in the statements, and how do people see that? Do they realize that that's what's going on?
Right, how transparent is that? How much
Right.
do you have to let people know? Mm-hmm. So a bit of that's very investigative, isn't it? It's a bit of a
Right.
whodunit in a way.
It could be. And, students may very unquestioningly put down historical cost and be perfectly correct in doing so. That's not the problem. It's realizing then that the financial statements are presenting something different than what a user might think, where they might think these are the market values.
Okay.
And realizing that, in fact, that is not the information you're providing.
And that makes a more ethical accountant. Or a more useful accountant. Somebody who can really trick people, or somebody who has
or at least
who does things in an ethical way.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's what occurs to me, when I think of the accounting profession. There's a lot of, like in any profession, a few shenanigans.
There's a few, yes, there's definitely a few, and ethics is something we need to be very aware of. I think students even understanding that they need to communicate that clearly is important, because communication is part of being an accountant. It's a very important part. How do you provide information? How do you present information? How do you write an effective report? Those are all, again, part of being a good accountant.
Right. That's a real intangible. How do you teach that? A real intangible. How do you make students feel that, decide where they stand as a professional?
That's something that I think we partly, in terms of if you focus just on the writing, we're doing as a program.
Okay.
Right? Because we are part of a larger program. It is a bachelor's in management.
Right.
We have our colleagues, as well as us, working on issues of effective writing and effective communication. And of course, we have liberal arts courses where often they're getting into issues of communication, whether it's in English, whether it's in, sometimes it comes up in places you wouldn't expect. I took a course in software engineering in my undergraduate program. I learned a lot about writing there and effective communication because it's part of creating effective user manuals. Mm-hmm. So this is part of having a richer setting for education, that students get exposed to things where ahead of time they may not have thought, boy, I really need that. But when they're done, realized, wow, I did learn a lot from that.
You also started in health information systems.
Yes.
Whatever moved you from there into this other area?
some people have very well-planned careers. I'm not one of them. I more or less accidentally drifted into accounting because I was interested in doing an MBA and then thinking about a PhD in epidemiology. And ultimately, because I applied to the U of A for the MBA program, and they basically wrote and said, well, you could also think about the PhD program. And I went up and talked to them, and the person who ultimately became my dissertation supervisor, when I told him what I was interested in, said, you could do that in accounting. So I ended up doing a PhD in accounting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And you're still working a little bit with health sciences on campus here.
I'm working with a colleague on a health-related project. Yes, so we're still doing some work related to health. Right?
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a bit about that? I think that's really interesting because accounting and health, to me, it's a little bit of a stretch.
Well, there's of course the whole issue of the efficiency and effectiveness of the healthcare system is something that Canadians are very interested in, but I wouldn't say that's the focus of this project. The focus of this project is probably more on issues of measuring quality of care and what people view as quality of care. For example, in our context, we're looking at assisted living versus a long-term care model. Which of those is going to provide you the quality of care you want, and how do you define that quality? Is quality of care excellent medical care, or is it excellent quality of life? And maybe the broader issue really is, what is the quality of life in a more traditional long-term care setting versus an assisted living setting, and which of those settings is more appropriate depending on your particular needs and stage of life? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of interesting issues of how you define those and measure those kinds of ideas.
And why are they different? Why isn't, if you get the best medical care, surely that's the best way to go as you're aging.
Yes, and that's a very, very reasonable perspective. I think it comes back to what I call somebody we were discussing this with called the chocolate cake issue. If you have potential diabetic problems, but you want a slice of chocolate cake, in a medical model, the answer should be fairly clear. No, you can't have the slice of chocolate cake, potentially. In an assisted living model, the answer might be, here's the risks of doing that, but it's your choice.
Right.
And some of it relates to issues of autonomy and choice and what risks you're willing to take in your own life. I think most of us could probably live a healthier life, but there's things we do not because they're healthy, but because we enjoy them. And that's, I think, part of what the issue is in comparing a more traditional long-term care model to an assisted living model.
Mm-hmm. Do your students get a look at that?
No, that's not something that's come up. So I wouldn't say we've gotten into that in the accounting setting. Maybe at some point down the road it will come up, but I haven't had occasion yet to get into that in the classroom.
And what are you learning in that research process? I don't know what stage you're at, but what kinds of challenges to you as an accountant are you finding in that research?
A lot of it is, accounting is a lot of it has to do with definitions and measurement. And I'd say there's some similar issues here. If you want to define quality of life as quality of care, then I think you arrive at what you mentioned, right? The best medical care is going to be the best quality of life. But is that how we define quality of life? So to me, that's an interesting measurement issue, definitional issue, and then you get into what different attributes do you need to capture to effectively measure quality of life. And there's lots and lots of existing research on this that we've been drawing on, but some of it is distinctly related to this question of how are we going to define quality of life, and what is your role as an independent agent versus somebody who is viewed more as a patient, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I just find it so fascinating that this is an area that an accountant would get involved in. That's
yeah, I wouldn't
super
call it
interesting.
traditional accounting.
Yeah,
but it is something of interest to me, and it was an interesting opportunity that came along. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You are involved with the teaching center. You said that they've helped you. What the teaching center at the University of Lethbridge offers support for professors. What kinds of things have you found helpful from the center? Are there particular parts of their work that you found, or on the other hand, perhaps you've contributed things to the center that help other people on campus, other teachers?
I think for the blended learning project, we had some discussions early on as a group with the teaching center in terms of what they could do to help us, what we could do to make the project more effective. We talked a little about philosophies of blended learning, and certainly got some very good help on some resources that might be helpful in thinking about what we could do and how to redesign the courses for blended learning. We had discussions about technology, what technology might be most appropriate, and it could be more obvious things like, should we use WebEx Training Center? Some of it was also issues related to what microphone to use. So those kinds of things. We also presented in terms of giving back. As a group, we did a presentation at last year's Teaching Day on how the blended learning had been going to date. So that was a little bit of giving back to the group and to the university to say, here's what we're learning as we go.
And what did other teachers, what feedback, what kind of interaction did you have with other professors about at that session?
I think there was quite a bit of interest about what we had been doing. There was some very good discussion, not specifically about blended learning, but about an issue I think we all struggle with, which is how do you effectively use a 2 hour and 50-minute class time?
Oh, right.
Because I think some colleagues from fine arts were saying we had found even 75 minutes perhaps didn't work for us as well as we wanted, and we've moved to more of a 55-minute or 50-minute class time. However, in Calgary and Edmonton, because they're working adults, usually they only want to come to campus for a particular class, one night a week or one day a week. So we have to figure out how we make good use of that class time.
And were there suggestions about that? I mean, I'm really interested in that because of the needing to condense and yet, work past a student and your own attention span. Your actual human ability to absorb.
Right.
And
I think the ideas were, I would say, the traditional approaches to dealing with this, which is trying to break up the class somewhat.
Well, yeah.
Doing a little different activities, and I'm not going to claim that I'm necessarily doing that especially well, although I'm certainly conscious of it. But having clear transitions, occasionally giving them something to work on. Again, that might be even a question on the material where they work on it. Of course, we always have a break in the middle of the class so the students get a bit of a chance to stand up and stretch their legs and do some other things. It is an ongoing challenge. I think it really is, to ensure that students aren't really losing it over the course of that time period.
Especially without that human element.
Right.
I'm thinking back to grade 1. A teacher, what was it that we did? 7 Up, stand up, and I can't even remember it, but yeah, something of that nature to break it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Are there things that you're reaching towards as a teacher? You've talked about a few things that you're reaching towards, that you want to explore, that you want to improve, that you're fascinated by but haven't tried.
I think teaching is always about improving. There's always an ongoing efforts. You get, nice ideas from colleagues or suggestions from students or suggestions from practitioners. Sometimes they're content related. We really need to be better about X, or the students aren't as strong as they need to be about X. Sometimes it's pedagogy related. We need to come up with ways to make the class more interesting. And certainly I would say that's an ongoing challenge. What do we do to make the class more interesting and still cover what needs to be covered? Because we have a lot of material to cover. That's an ongoing challenge which relates directly to issues of engagement. So I would say that's something I want to continue working on. Getting a means of creating that online community when I'm doing blended learning, for me, would be one of the challenges I want to work on. Those are both big ones. Also, for the students that are struggling a little more, because the accounting major is a professional program and it is challenging, is trying to ensure that when students are floundering, that they come in for help. I try to be very flexible with office hours. I answer lots of email, but there's still that ongoing knowledge that there's some students who are really struggling that I just never see outside of class time, and figuring out ways to encourage them to come in and get the help they need.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. It's easy to teach the very bright students to a certain extent, but it's those that are really struggling and often are embarrassed, aren't they, by their struggles, and really don't want to expose their inability.
Right.
Yeah, that's a real side of teaching that is often ignored,
It is, and it is part of, again, we've chosen to be an access university, which I think is a wonderful thing, but it does mean there are times we have to do, I think, more of that outreach, or at least try and do more to encourage the students to take advantage of the many resources available. Because it's not just me. We have the Student Success Center. We have, tutoring opportunities. Some years the accounting club has offered tutors that students can pay to help them with things. There's all sorts of online resources. Just getting students to realize there is a range of stuff out there that they can draw on.
Yeah. That's the whole other environment around teaching that, again, isn't visible. This kind of tip of the iceberg is you in the classroom. Then there's a whole other
infrastructure, yes, that I benefit from, and that some of them benefit from a lot, and some others I wish would benefit from more.
Right. And some don't even recognize that they need to benefit from it. You said earlier, again, the formation of yourself as a teacher, because I think that those stories are really interesting. You talk about having teachers that you were really, that did things that really affected you or that were really effective. Do you have any stories about that? Do you have any particular stories that you remember as a learner of a moment where you were like, aha, that would be something? Or, retrospectively, I suppose, looking back and saying, wow, I didn't know it at the time. Were there real key moments in your learning that stand out?
I think the key things were not so much necessarily the pedagogy as the questions we explored. I've had some questions from some courses that, I still don't know if I have a good answer to 20 years later, that I would think about. And to some ways, to me, that was the hallmark of a really great course. Again, going back to my point at the beginning, we talked about internalizing knowledge. To the extent it affected your thinking or your behavior, that to me was an important part of a good course.
Can you come up with one of those really puzzling questions? I think you're right. I think the good question can really hook a learner and can really drive, I need to think about this.
Right.
This is an issue I really care about, that I need to do something about. But can you remember any of those for you?
At the moment, and I'm scared you were going to ask that, and at the moment one is not directly coming to mind.
Right.
But even issues of effective communication, writing concisely, and still getting the message across, which led to an interest later for me of how you represent information, diagrams versus text, for example.
Okay.
And how people might interact with those, which again is a huge research area in and of itself, but is also an interesting issue for teaching. When should we use a diagram? When should we use a picture? When should we use tables?
A demonstration.
A video. Those are all, I think, really good issues to struggle with teaching, but to some degree they stemmed from this earlier discussion of providing information concisely. And if you take it to the next step, that might be, a mathematical form, providing it very concisely, but then you may start to have issues of interpretability. So that trade-off, and again, I think the same thing is true with writing. Sometimes you can be extremely concise, but perhaps lose something in interpretability. So those are, I think, interesting research issues, but also interesting pedagogical issues.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried one of those things and have it lose your students completely?
Oh, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. I have done some short videos to help students on particularly what I thought were particularly challenging points, so they could watch them and rewatch them. I'm not going to say that, again, they were fantastic videos. They were kind of my first foray into the area, and I still need to go and create some more and improve on them. But I think, again, it was an attempt to do something. I'm very text-oriented, to look at it from a different perspective. I tried more this past term creating more like decision tables or flowcharts. Think about these factors and then work your way through, to organize the information a little differently. I don't know if it helped, but I noticed some of the students were replicating them in the notes they were bringing to exams, so some of them clearly found them useful, or thought they might be useful. We'll see how that goes. I'll try creating a few more and get some feedback on them and whether this is helping or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Have you ever had, I'm going to ask the question that I hate to answer, an epic failure in the classroom that you care to think about, or a moment that is just, often these are moments that we really learn from, but they're in your face when they're happening.
I could probably give you a long list of epic failures in the classroom. The one that probably bothers me the most, and it was simply an issue with me effectively dealing with a student who was struggling, they were having an issue with communication. And I was trying to simplify the question for them because I started with a more complex question and they were struggling answering it. And I boiled it down to eventually kind of a yes-no approach. But ultimately, I think it came across as, rather than being helpful, came across as more condescending. And I felt very badly about it. It wasn't my intent. It was an intent to help them. But it didn't come, I think, across as effectively as I wanted. So that was unfortunate. And I still feel badly about that because that wasn't what I was going for. But
yeah, a question of tone and perception, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, and again, I just can't imagine how you manage that online because you can't read.
Yeah, and that was a face-to-face, so that was a little easier. But
certainly tell
yeah.
that the student was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I certainly knew, and as I said, I was simply trying to get them out of an awkward situation quickly, but as I said, it didn't go the way I would certainly have hoped. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. That these are as I say, learning moments mostly.
Absolutely.
And so, how do you do that now? How do you deal with that now if a question is complex? Are there strategies that you've...
Sometimes it's breaking apart more into pieces. I think a lot of us do that, so you break it into discrete chunks and help students work through it. Sometimes it's just realizing a student has gotten started on something but is no longer sure where to go with and just saying, okay, you've got the ball rolling, let's go on to somebody else. And doing more of that kind of thing. Because sometimes it's nice that a student just at least attempted to get something going, even if they could only get started on it. And acknowledging that and appreciating that, and then seeing if the rest of the class can help in continuing along with developing the concept.
Because people work at all different rates.
Yes, they do.
And styles. Yeah. I think that long list of epic failures is the teacher's home.
Yes. That we periodically contemplate and think, now what really should I have done there? Yes.
Yeah. You are forming accountants. You're turning people into professional people. You have to you have to interact with a professional body that obviously gives an exam. Why not just teach to that exam and make people succeed at the exam?
It is important to us that students succeed at the exam, but that's not the only thing we're doing. I would give full credit to the CPAs for having a very broad curriculum. The courses they're required to take, students go way beyond accounting. There's finance, there's strategy, there's English, there's economics, there's statistics. So it is a very comprehensive curriculum. And it's also in Canada even more than an exam. After they complete the degree, they also do a training program with CPA Canada. Western Canada, it's called the CPA School of Business, or that's the body through which they do the program. So there's additional education that's provided as well by the CPAs. But as part of our program, in addition to covering the material needed to succeed in that program and the ultimate professional exam, we are also doing, I would call, some additional broader educational concepts related to furthering critical thinking, furthering communications, making them think more deeply about the foundations of accounting, and additional business knowledge, whether it's marketing, whether it's human resource management, that is also helpful to being a business professional. And of course, we've got the assorted liberal arts courses that students can choose from that relate as well to just being an effective member of society. So that to me is all part of the broader educational experience. And I think that's one of the strengths of our program, that we do speak to that broader experience.
Indeed. Do you have also graduate students?
We do.
And do you yourself, are you supervising?
Not at the moment. I have had 2 master's students I have supervised or co-supervised. I've also been a reader for 2 additional master's students. And that's a little bit different orientation because the master's program here is an academic master's. So much of our emphasis on training a student to go on to do a PhD in accounting.
Right.
So it's a somewhat different emphasis than what we would do in our undergraduate program, where we are focusing on education related to creating a strong professional accountant.
So let's circle back again, and just I just am so fascinated because I haven't done blended learning. I have done, obviously online work with students increasingly, because that's the way it seems like this generation is fluid and familiar. Some people say that you have to do things differently when you're face-to-face than when you're online. So some things, some strategies of teaching, some methods of teaching may only work in the classroom, and some may only work online. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it depends in part what you normally do in the classroom and what your approach is online. I have not found big differences between the two.
That could be because you're one of your areas that you've spent so much time studying is technology. Do you think?
That does have an effect, and having a technology background is helpful because I'm fairly comfortable with it. I'm not going to claim I get everything right, but I'm happy experimenting and playing with things and trying different things and reading about it. My classroom tends to be oriented basically a lecture, but a lot of questions back and forth. I've done some flipped classroom stuff. We do the polling as well. And the polling and the lectures and the questions back and forth all work very well in a synchronous, real-time type setting where we're all there at the same time. If I were doing a recorded lecture with an exercise and just posting that, I think then that would have a big effect. I would have to do that quite differently than what I do in the classroom. But because I've effectively recreated what I do in the classroom in a real-time setting, I haven't transitioned a lot. The part that might be a little more challenging, and I didn't do it the past year, if I were flipping the classroom, then you have to have the technology that supports students working in groups and then coming back to you with questions and being easily able to reach out of their online group and say, I have a problem, can you come help? Because with flipping the classroom in a physical setting, I'm constantly walking around and looking for help and providing tips and feedback and saying, yeah, you're on the right track. You have to have that very fluid and very seamless in an online setting, and I'm not sure even with the technology I use that supported groups if it would work as well. It's something I might try playing with this fall. But that would be the main piece I would say would not translate well. The rest of what I've been doing has translated pretty well.
So we're not talking about the ghost teacher where the class is already created and basically it just runs over there and the teacher's, in Bermuda or something.
Yeah.
No, you're still there. You're very
I'm still
much there and able to react in the moment. I think that's so interesting because teaching is such a dialogue.
Yes.
If you don't get what is happening with the students, you just barrel on through, and is there any learning happening? There's plenty of teaching going on.
Right, but is there learning happening?
Yeah.
And I think to the extent that's a problem in the online setting, it's also a problem in the classroom setting. Where I'm doing it in one, I'm probably doing it in the other, and where I'm catching it in one, I'm probably catching it in the other.
That's so interesting that you were able to kind of customize that online environment to suit your style. I think that's very encouraging for people to hear about, because I think it's for people like myself who are not technophobes but who don't consider that. It's more interesting then.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging. It also works for the particular nature of the class. Although some of my colleagues have had wonderful success creating these online modules where students interact with it and work through, I was a little worried about doing that for the particular accounting course I teach because there's so much material that if students thought, well, I can leave that for a couple of weeks and I'll go do it later, that they would end up drowning in the material. So keeping it very structured and continuing to have the online classes at a scheduled time, to me was important to keep the students from inadvertently creating a big problem for themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
From, their own bad habits or their own difficulties.
Right, and the habits, of course, we probably all have. Oh, I'll do that tomorrow,
Yes.
But it can have huge consequences if you've got many other things going on in your life and suddenly realize this will be very difficult to get caught up on.
Right, and I mean, it's easy to write an idea or to transmit an idea. It's much less easy to, as you say, internalize it. It takes a much longer time and then be able to move to the next stage. So you need that time. You can't actually do it all in a 24-hour
No.
marathon. No.
No, if you're thinking you can leave it to the night before the exam, it's not going to work that way.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something to very much keep in mind about learning and online, because online can give us the illusion that it's so quick
Right.
and so efficient, but we're still humans at
Yes.
either end of that technology, and we are who we are.
Exactly.
And well, who are we is the next question. I want to go back also, you're talking about the washing machines. We made light of that, and I don't mean to, because I take that very, very seriously. We have a different demographic, different age, different kind of learner in our, I don't even know if you call them satellite campuses,
Northern
but
campuses.
the northern campuses. Then perhaps in management in Lethbridge. First of all, in the Lethbridge, live classrooms, is that true? That the demographic is different?
Yes, I would say it is, and I think in discussions with my colleague, we generally feel the students are different across the campuses.
So what are the differences?
I would say in Lethbridge, we have the traditional high school graduate or has a diploma from a college coming here, early 20s, late teens, working maybe part-time, but that's, may still be living at home or living in an apartment with someone. I would say what we think of as the traditional student.
So less life experience.
Less life experience, probably, hopefully working a little less, hopefully not working full-time. But some of them are, and that can create challenges too. But I would say closer to the traditional student.
But you must have, my stereotype is that you must have several international students in your classes. It's a very
Yes.
attractive program for international students.
We do, and I'd still say though they're international, but they're still closer to that traditional student demographic in my perception.
Right.
Calgary and Edmonton, you have more working adults. And a larger international demographic. Both Calgary and Edmonton have a more diverse populations, so you've got a lot greater range of ethnic backgrounds and work experiences and life experiences, and that definitely has an effect. Probably the most obvious one in accounting is that they do have work experience. Some of them are working as bookkeepers, some of them are just working in an organization, but they can bring that to the classroom to a greater extent. And I would say last fall we had some terrific discussions in Calgary about people's questions about, well, how would this work in this setting? And I think sometimes there's a bit of a tendency for students to think participation is kind of one of those necessary evils. I have to do it, therefore I will do it, but it doesn't really bring anything to the class. And I would say the Calgary class last fall was an excellent example of why that's not true, especially when it goes right, because I think everybody's understanding radically improved as a result of some really good discussions, and they didn't have anything to do with me. They had to do with students bringing up scenarios of how would we account for, how would we deal with, and then other students chiming in and raising good issues and variations on the point. And you could almost see for some people around the room going, oh, that is how that would work. That's how this plays out. And it was fantastic. And again, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with some really good questions being asked and some really good experiences being brought to bear.
Right.
Yeah.
And that student receiving so much advice about a real life situation that immediately is helpful to that learner.
It's helpful to them, or even just helpful, and again, back to the internalization thing, this is how this works.
Right.
And that was, as I said, it was wonderful to me. I think it was one of the best examples I've had of that. If you don't have that experience to bear, sometimes it's harder, although in a day-to-day setting, we could still talk about, how do you account for when you go and buy a sandwich at Subway? Or what happens with your university tuition? How would the university account for that? And getting students to think about in a day-to-day setting, this is constantly going on. Why do we do it the way they do it? How would it be done? What would be the choices? What would be the consequences of those choices? Is something, it's easier, I think, when they have a little more life experience. Still possible in the other settings, but maybe a little easier with life experience.
And so then with the demographic here on campus, the younger demographic, you have to personalize it.
It's something I'm working on. Working on personalizing it more and trying to get them to think
like the
more.
sandwich and the family and the
rest of it. Yeah.
Right. Using different examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. I think you're right. I think it's very dynamic when students can bring their own life experience to the issue, and then you can tailor your response as a teacher.
Right, and as I said, let others also contribute to get that shared learning. And again, that was to me a good example of a community experience.
Right.
And the other part of it, again, excuse me, we're an access university. This is another means of providing access. These are students who might otherwise have a lot of difficulty attending these classes if they were done in a traditional daytime, 3 times a week or 2 times a week. Instead, we have evenings, weekends. We do some of this blended learning. For some of them, that really improves their ability to take advantage of what we can offer.
Mm-hmm. Well, how great that you're able to provide such a good service. And we know you are providing such a good service because people are recognizing your achievements. So congratulations.
Thank you.
For all of that.
Thank you.
And thanks for your time today. I've learned a lot.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the time.
You're welcome.